Hello and welcome to Springboard, your virtual university. My name is Albert Okran, welcoming you on behalf of Team Springboard, ably led by Comfort. This is your most inspirational show and the point where the greatest minds in the world converge. Springboard is brought to you by the Springboard Roadshow Foundation and proudly sponsored by MTN Pulse Just Be, the Enterprise Group Enterprise Your Advantage, UMB Bank celebrating 50 years in banking and Central University, Ghana's premier private Christian university, our media partners, the Multimedia Group and the Graphic Business. So today we continue in the engine room, most people's favorite place where they get to hear behind the scenes stories from achievers and frontliners in various fields of endeavor, from art to academia to business to governance to everything in between. And today we have a very special one for you because we say we are going to the unseen part of the engine room. Today's show is very special for three reasons. First, because mental fitness is very big for us here at the virtual university. Secondly, because today we enter the inner chamber, that part of our lives that we rarely want to talk about, but which are so critical for our progress. And the third reason is the biggest, because we get to hear the amazing story of one of our favorite people right here at the virtual university, sharing the two sides of the story. First, as a carer or service provider, and the second side also as a patient in her own unique way. In the studio today is a physician, clinical psychologist, and bioethicist, our own Dr. Kyerewaa Edwin. Amma, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Rev.
Charlie, we know about physician, we know about clinical psychologist, but what on earth is a bioethicist?
So most people know about ethics for most professions. You know, the ethics of journalism, the ethics of ministry, ethics of the... So bioethics is broader. It looks at the ethical issues involved not only in the biomedical areas, but research, the new things that are coming, innovation. We know about genetic engineering. We know about gene splicing. I mean, all of those things that can raise a lot of philosophical issues and the issue of yes we can but must we. So what ethics tries to do is to situate it and let us know what we ought to do, not what we can do just because the technology is available.
Are you like a regulator?
No, the regulators, I mean, part of it is ethics doesn't have enforcing power except the part that is coded. So in Ghana, for instance, if you take act, is it? Oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of the act, but the one that regulates, there's a part of it regulates clinical trials. So for instance, so if you bring your protocol and it's being reviewed by an ethics board, there are things that the law allows you to do or does not allow you to do. But there are other things that the law doesn't speak about. Let's say we have a criminal condemned to death and you have about 10 doctors, top doctors in their field. They all need different organs. And this criminal is fit. His organs are perfect. He's going to be killed per the court decision. Is it okay to say that, well, because his organs are okay, then let's take his organs and give it to these 10 top doctors who are contributing so much? Maybe for criminal, people will say, well, he's going to die anyway, so why don't you let him do some good? But he's supposed to die by either firing squad or hanging or electric chair, but not for his organ. He has to give consent. So you can't say, yes, you can't say that just because he's been condemned to die, the state can say, let's take his organs.
Wow.
And, you know, so those are...
You make it sound so cool. So do you get to practice all three legs of your career?
Yes, I do. And I think the one area, so my clinical practice is mostly in palliative care, even though I do clinical ethics. And
for the benefit of our viewers and listeners,
okay,
what is
palliative care? Palliation is more to the original word means to cover. to put a cloak, to cloak someone. So let's say someone is cold and you are cloaking the person. So it's more like comfort or supportive care. So for people with life-limiting diseases, there's sometimes a lot that we can't do to cure them, but there's a lot we can do to make them live the best quality of their life. So in palliative care,
people are about to die.
No, you see, okay, so I mean,
nicely.
no, so that is hospice. Hospice, end of life care is part of palliative care, but it's the continuum. That's why I say supportive. I prefer supportive and palliative care, because a lot of people equate palliative care to end of life care.
Right.
Even physicians, I've had physicians, you ask, oh, why didn't you refer the patient to palliative care? Oh, but she's not dying. And now I'm like, okay, we still need to talk a lot about it, because palliative care doesn't mean end of life. End of life is part of it, but that is towards the end. Even if you are diagnosed with life-limiting diseases, diabetes is a life-limiting disease.
Right.
Cancers that can be cured, life-limited disease, hypertension, and we can, because we support you with pain, with symptom management, with psychosocial support, with spiritual care, all of that. So palliative care is to help you live the best life you can live amidst the condition in which you are in. And as a physician, a clinical psychologist, and a bioethicist, I mean, I wear all those three hats in that area, because end of life issues, ethical issues. Most of the consults that you get someone who is dying, says, I want everything. And sometimes at the end of the day, you do everything, the person still dies, and then the patient's family can pay the bill. But maybe if the person had not insisted on wanting everything, or the family hadn't insisted, they could have had a better quality of life. Instead of the person being intubated and not recovering, maybe he would have had his maybe high flow oxygen, all right, but would be able to interact with the people. The person can do that.
One thing I can say is that at least you've been educated a bit more about what you do. And this is what the virtual university is all about. So let's flip this conversation about mental fitness. And I call it mental fitness because it's more than just mental health. It's a broad, I want to focus on the broad fitness of the person mentally. So let's start from the end and work our way backwards. Let's start with yourself. You are an accomplished medical professional. Everybody knows you to be that person who speaks in big conferences around the world, and a consultant for that matter. But share your own experience of your own stress and your own depression as a source of encouragement to somebody listening who says, I want to be like Dr. Edwin, big medical professional.
Okay. So my foray into mental health, or the field of mental health, was actually somewhere November 1985. I was in lower six in Achimota School, and I had all these issues. And then a mate and friend of mine, Kofi Lane, said, you know, there's this nice lady I know. I'll take you to go and talk, have a chat with her. So we went to Legon, and then it was my mentor, Dr. Abasis Sifadide of blessed memory. So that was the first time I met her, and after about an hour, I felt so better, and I walked away saying, this is what I want to do.
Wow.
But I also loved medicine, so I went to medical school. After medical school, was working in the psychiatric hospital, because for me it's mental health. And then along the line, I felt that I wanted to do clinical psychology and not psychiatry. That was my bent. So I went there and been working and having a great time doing that, even though sometimes some of the people you deal with can be challenged. But I remember sometime in May 2009, I realized that I had become withdrawn and weepy, not eating, not doing. Initially, I thought at that time my husband was going to do a fellowship in pediatric and congenital heart surgery in South Africa for 2 years. And we had prayed that we're not moving as a family. He would go, but we would visit often. So I was okay. But after about 3 weeks, I knew what it was. So I went to see a senior colleague and friend of mine, Prof. Samuel Hine, and I mean, you know, when you are a professional, you know the deal. Normally, when you go, there are tests that you get. And I remember one test that he gave me, and I was like, Sammy, you know, I give these tests to people. I know how it's scored, so definitely I'm going to write it in a way that it will reflect positively, because just the idea that it's depression didn't sit well with me. And the surprising thing was, he said, even knowing that and knowing that you are filtering your answers, your score still indicates severe depression.
Wow.
And so, well, I started medication, then I got better. But then I was having therapy with Dr. Sefadidi too at the same time. But over time, I realized that it was hard. It was hard because anytime I saw a patient with depression, I would break down. Anytime I saw it, especially people like me, it's like, you know, for years we're married, we didn't have a child, I didn't get pregnant. I wasn't depressed that time. I was sad at times, but if I had been depressed, it would have made sense to me because there was something. So it's like infertility, depression as a result of infertility. It's understandable. It happens. But everything seemed great. And so is it like because my husband is going away, does it mean I'm so dependent? So it became an issue of who am I as a person? Am I not whole without my husband and all of that? These were things I had to work in therapy because that was the only link I could find, you know.
Was it more difficult for you because you knew so much about the condition?
I think it was more difficult because I've always known stigma is real and I've fought against stigma. But for me, it became more difficult when one time I was in the pharmacy in Kolebu buying fluoxetine, and a friend who is a pharmacist came and it's like, oh, I'm aware then I'm still metal fluoxetine. And like, for who? Without thinking, I said for myself, who could call South Africa kakreya, when you depressed, menfa. I mean, I was like, first of all, you are a pharmacist and a clinical pharmacist at that. Secondly, this was a public space. Kolebu 24-hour pharmacy. Even if you thought I was not depressed, being depressed makes you vulnerable, but to just let it out and say, so that's when I realized that, okay, this stigma is real. And then you hear more stories. Another person tells me, you know, a senior colleague too says that, oh, you know, you can't be a Christian and be depressed. If you're a Christian and you are depressed, it's either there's sin in your life or you're not trusting God. And that day, I wept like I have never wept before. But thankfully, I was able to go and see Dr. Sefadidi and Prof. Ohine, and we talked through these issues because I didn't expect this from medics. You see, if people who don't know about this talk about it, fine. But here it was, as Frank used to say, I was self-stigmatizing. So that itself was difficult because it was, now I'm talking about it, but I felt I'm not strong enough because in my mind it was linked to my husband going to South Africa.
Let me pause here. And by the way, when you said Frank, for the benefit of our viewers, that's your husband, Prof. Frank Edwin, and we celebrate you, Prof, for who you are and what you represent. But Amma, is it wrong to be in love?
No, it's not about being in love.
Even if you were going to miss your husband.
Yes, but to the point of, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's like to be diagnosed with severe clinical depression as a result of that really didn't. But, you know, so later on, part of what came up in therapy was childhood abuse that I had blurted out when the person who abused me died, and my mom told me. So I was like, okay, in my mind, maybe you see, if adverse childhood events can lead to serious mental challenges and mental problems. So again, I'm talking about who I think I am, a woman who knows God, knows who she is, loves her husband. But I didn't want to be the woman who becomes depressed because her husband is away for 2 years. And almost the longest interval we had apart was 6 weeks. I was visiting often.
Let me ask you, how did Frank feel about that part of the story?
Whether
the fact that it was linked to his travel.
He thought that it's just, he's more practical. He said it's just coincidental. I think I was doing psychoanalysis on myself. That's why I was desperate in quotes to find a cause. Though I teach and I tell my parents, my patients, that most of the time we can't find the cause of depression. But when there's a cause, especially something that is outside you feel kind of better in a way. It's like if you're diagnosed with cancer and you become depressed as a result. It's understandable. But everything seems to be going on with your life and you are diagnosed with depression, then people wonder, and that's why someone could tell me that as a Christian, if you are depressed, it's either you don't have faith or there's sin in your life, because the joy of the Lord is our strength. So it's, I'll put it how Dr. Sifa did put it. She said, Amma, you are letting the diagnosis of depression oppress you.
In your case, we get to actually talk to somebody that is a practitioner in the same field, providing service, who says, listen, the service I provide is not strange to me because I've had my own experiences and my own pain, if I may use that word for lack of a better word. And that makes you, you're very special. So I want to use your experience as a springboard, if I may, to reach out to people who are struggling and wondering, how do I reach out to get help? What will people think? And so let's start from what I call the rat race. Do you think society-wise, generally, we load ourselves with too much pressure to succeed?
I think we do that now. If I looked at my parents' generation, yes, both my parents work, both were in teaching. They come home occasionally over weekend. You see, my mom says she's making her nose or something, but for most of the time, they came home in good time, and when they came home, the rest was family time. In this era, especially in the virtual era, it's not like that. I remember years ago, my older son was about 5 or 6 years, and so that was when I was doing my program, my MA in bioethics. Then I'd come home and I had a deadline to submit before the time, so I was in the bedroom. They kept knocking and I was like, oh please, let me do, I have homework. At least he understood the concept of homework. When I finished and I came back, he said, Mommy, please finish your work before you come home, so that when you come home, we know you are home. I was like, wow. It's like that was it. So that when you are home, because here you are home, but we don't have access to you. You'll be checking emails. Most of us have our emails on the phone. They have these. So the concept of well-being, which is something that we should all do for ourselves, is far-fetched. But especially for people who serve people, so for those in the services, especially healthcare, I think that it's an ethical imperative to take care of ourselves. Because if you break down, you're of no use to your patients. So there are things I personally decided not to do. I think it's from this year that when I come home, I'm not putting on my laptop. If I'm putting on my laptop, then maybe I'm listening to a message, or something else. I think that I'd rather do it on phone, because once you are on the laptop, there'll be an email alert that I'll see. There'll be something that will pop up, and before you know, you are just walking round the clock, and the things you want to do, spending time with your children, even when they are coming to ask you a question, it's like a distraction. I'm busy. But we have to find a balance between our work and our being. We are human beings, not human doings. It's like we become human doings. We're always doing. And we think the more you can pack in a day, the better it is. No. Rest is important. God gave us the Sabbath, remember?
Prof, Doc, you capture an issue that I'm sure, and I can tell that tonight the house is full. If I say the house is full, it's a virtual house, and I can tell that it's packed. It's packed today as we discuss this subject, because you speak for not just medical practitioners. You talk about people who care for people. I can tell you that pastors are probably even more guilty.
Yeah.
Because your life is not your own, and everyone's taking a claim to your life genuinely believes that they need it or they deserve it or both.
Yeah.
And the needs are real. So if you don't take time, you sacrifice your wellness, as you mentioned, and it could have dire consequences. Let's help educate our publics with the sources of stress. So you say we are human beings, not human doers, and so we should rest. Yeah. Would lack of rest be the first one?
Yes. When you are exhausted, definitely it's going to affect you. It will wear you out. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. You will not be your optimum best if you are not. Definitely worry. There are so many. So normally, let me put it this way. When we talk about stress, is it the event or is it the response? There is an event A, there is a response C, and in between you have the space B. The event you can't change. You've lost a loved one. It's painful. Unless God raises that person up again, that is it. The response, yes, grieving is important, and grieving is a road to recovery. But are you going to grieve and stop living because your loved one died? Is that what your loved one would want for you? Or knowing who your loved one is, they would want you to be able to go on living and even use this devastating event as a springboard for something else. You could have a ministry helping people who are grieving, people who are finding it difficult to move on. So something that could have been a devastating effect, as in you stop living and it's so stressful, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you've lost weight, you don't want to see anybody, you don't want to talk to anybody. You use that space to reconfigure what you can do. So events happen, lack of money, lack of job, relationship issues. Probably that should be number 2. Relationship issues. One of the things that grieves me is when people attempt to end their life because someone has left them. A human being has left you, and you are so devastated, you think that you are better off dead. Of course, in the moment, the pain, and emotional pain can hurt you physically. I have experienced it. You know that you feel the pain within. But the pain, the source of the pain is emotional. It's not physical. It's psychological. It's not physical. But it is not worth your life. How many of us have not been in relationships that we thought we couldn't do without, and then it ends, and years later you see the person and I'm like seriously? Is this the thing? We won't even say is this a person? Is this the thing I was? That kind of thing. But it's with time and healing.
But let me ask you, and again, I come back to the point I made about being deeply in love. If you love somebody that much, and in your case, if I may use your borrow from your case, the first thought that came to mind was probably Frank is leaving, and you are so close to Frank that Comfort had to travel for a year after we got married, I'm sure I had mental health issues. My only ameliorating mechanism was that I brought two of my closest friends to live with me in the house. So there was always somebody around you. But I must tell you that it really disorganized me.
Yeah.
And so if I didn't have that support, who knows what one thing would have led to. So it is possible. I mean,
oh yes, it is. In fact, it was something that came up in my discussion with Dr. Sifadidi, that yes, we talked about it. And so what if it's, I think it was my interpretation, because if I had seen it as, oh my God, it's going to be challenging, I'm going to miss him, I'm going, and that, but I saw it as a weakness.
Right.
So it was the spin I put, the event.
And the likely outcome is this if you don't do this. So what you're saying is that in the midfield, in between the goalkeeper and the attack, sit in the midfield and control your reaction
exactly
and your interpretation of the event.
Yes.
So yes, I love Frank, I will miss him, but instead of reacting and saying how could I say what do I do to keep myself whole, occupied and happy till Frank comes back.
Or even in this case, yes, I am depressed. Let's assume that the reason, or not the reason, but one of the precipitating factors, because we always talk about, I mean, maybe you have a predisposition and then the precipitation, which is the immediate cause, and the things that maintain it. So let's say that the precipitating factor in this case was his being away. So what? You are close to him, you're going to, but it's not like being diagnosed with depression doesn't mean you are ill. It doesn't mean that you are weak. It's an illness. Something I always told my patient, it has nothing to do with being weak or strong. But at that time, I bought into the stigma. And that's why Frank said I was self-stigmatizing, you know, because I felt that doesn't mean that I'm not whole without him. So because marriage is two independent people who come and interdependence, you know,
do you
but
think
not
the self-stigmatizing thing you mentioned is widespread?
Oh, it is common because we live in a society. We all know how we think of people who we think have issues. Oh, this person, we use expressions like, oh, the person is mental, or he's gone, or he's crazy. We have all these things there. Once you are in that society, and we live in a society where we have expressions like meaning that even if the person who is mad in quote, or the person with psychological or has a psychiatric disorder is cured, there's some that will be left that he will use to frighten children. You know, so it's as if we don't even think. And you know, every now and then I ask people, so what if you get to know, let me bring this because this is something that happened to me and it was important. I was teaching a class of MPhil psychology students, clinical psychology students. So I was teaching them on the ethics of counseling and clinical psychology. And we're talking about competence. How do you assess for competence? How do you know? You know, so we talked about that. And then after that, I was like, okay, so would you guys be willing to see me? Do you think I'm competent? That was the question I asked about the class also. They were all like, oh yes, you're very competent. So if you have any issue, would you come and see me? Because, oh, Dr. Edwin will come. Then I told them, what if I were to tell you that for the past 1 year, I've been taking fluoxetine? So this was in 2010. So at that time, I don't even think they believed me. But I said, what if I were to tell you that for the past 1 year I've been taking fluoxetine? Would you still see me? Can you believe, Rev? Not one person. These were MPhil clinical psychology students who a few minutes ago had told me that I was competent and that if they had a problem, they would come and see me. And then I told them that, oh, for the past year, I've been taking fluoxetine, and not one person. Straight after the lecture, in fact, all three of them, Professor Furiata, Professor Hine, Dr. Sifa, they were in a meeting. I just went in and I said, we should stop what you're doing because your students, I'm not joking, your students that I just finished, I mean, this was the scenario. And as I said, I don't even think that they knew. But even if they knew, because a minute ago, before I asked that, you thought I was competent, you would see me, blah, blah, blah. Now you get to know this, and So then why are you in mental health? Because if you don't think that a practitioner can recover, or because I've been on it for 1 year, it is maintenance. It's not acute depression. It's like me telling you that I have hypertension and so I'm on medication, maintenance medication, and because of that you won't come and see me. I mean, that's how senseless it is, but it shows how widespread stigma is, because we all are members of the society.
This is Springboard, your virtual university. I warned you when we started that this was going to be very, very revealing and very, very explosive. My guest for today, Dr. Kyerewaa Edwin. She's a physician, a clinical psychologist, and a bioethicist. On Rebecca, but she's been telling a story that, and the note of which she just ended this first part is just blown my mind away. That people who trust you, are confident in your competence, suddenly change their outlook when you say, I myself am receiving help. Let's go for this break. When we come back, let's go into the unseen part of the engine room, the extent to which people go hiding their cars and walking behind the house just to see a practitioner for help, so no one will see them and see their car number. If you ever have heard about the extent to which people go, you realize that we have a big, big issue. Please don't go away.
There once was a man who had it all. He had skill, he had charisma. He was loved by all, but above all, he knew the importance of helping others, lifting others up. He knew the importance of giving other people an advantage so that they too would use that advantage to help others. All you need is that advantage that sets you apart from the rest. And when you discover that advantage, life's challenges don't seem so daunting anymore. That's where we come in. Enterprise, your advantage.
Central University, we are not just giving theoretical knowledge, but also real-life practical immersion. Our projects and research are targeted at solving real-life problems within our built and the natural environment. My name is Che Joseph Bafo, an architecture student. The faculty and facilities available to us make us industry ready. The project I'm working on recently won an award when my colleagues and I visited the Netherlands. Central University makes you industry ready.
Welcome back to Springboard, your virtual university, and to this big conversation in the unseen side of the engine room. Springboard is brought to you by the Springboard Roadshow Foundation and proudly sponsored by MTN, Pulse, Just Beat, Enterprise Group, Enterprise Your Advantage, UMB Bank, celebrating 50 years in banking, and Central University, Ghana's premier private Christian university. Our media partners, the Multimedia Group and the Graphic Business. On Tuesday in the Graphic Business, find the story fully transcribed for your reading exhortation. I want to say pleasure, but this is more about instruction, exhortation, and information and admonition, and you can share it with your friends and loved ones as well. Find it also on my Joy Online and also at springboard.com.gh. My guest for today, Dr. Kyerewaa Edwin, helping us to understand the side of life we have never probably looked at in this way. The last point you made about your students, excited about your work, excited about your competence, suddenly beginning to withdraw when you say I'm on medication. That point hits me in the in the stomach.
Yeah.
Listen, is it any wonder the extent to which people go to hide it when they are getting help? And help us appreciate the extent to which people go.
Exactly.
Like Nicodemus at night.
Yes. So a lot of you get, please, blah, blah, loved one, but can you come and see the person at home, or do you have a private place we can see you? In fact, now it's even better because apart from the major psychiatric hospitals, almost all the big hospitals in Accra have mental health departments or units. So at Ridge, at 37 Police Hospital, Kolebu, they even have a ward that they admit. So it's easier because if someone is going to Kolebu, it's a general hospital, even though still you go to the department. And the challenge is when people feel that they are being seen by another person. I remember when we were in medical school, the one place all of us would wear our white coat and put our stethoscope around our knuckles when we were doing the psychiatric rotation, because we wanted to, people who are there know that we are not patients. We are not there, we are students. Other times on the ward, you don't feel like wearing white coat is hot, but the psychiatric hospital, you see everybody with their white coat and then a stethoscope around their neck just to show that they are students. So
Are we unkind as a society? Are we unkind?
I don't think it's unkind per se, but it's how we've seen mental health and how we've treated people, chaining them, beating. So it comes from, someone with a mental health disorder might be might be called a witch, or the person might be said that he's evil or he's done something, but very vulnerable. So they were seen as people who shouldn't be part of society. If you see where the psychiatric hospital started, now it's in the center of town. But in the early 1900s, when it started, it wasn't in the center of town. It was far removed from town. You go see where Pantine Hospital is. It was also far removed from town. You go to Ankafo, the same thing. I think the only one that started right in the center was the unit in Kumasi, which started within the Konfuanoche Teaching Hospital. So our perception is these are people who shouldn't be in the main community. So we take them out. Either it was a Drushana, they're taking it to a fetish or a herbalist. It was always out of town, then chained. Some of them are chained. Even now, there are some places, even places you would expect better, places that are supposed to be prayer camps. They still have these people chained, but of course, it's far, far better now. It's much improved now. But now, even though I say that people are more willing to see mental health practitioners, people they want to see a psychologist. Sometimes I tell them that, you need to see a psychiatrist first. And then they are not. It's as if we've moved a bit, but we've stopped. People are more comfortable seeing a psychologist. But the moment you say a psychiatrist, then it means that this is the extreme severe. I've had that. People who have called and I said, you need to see a psychiatrist. I recommend I get you one. They give you an appointment. They don't show.
Let me find out. Do people sometimes suffer in silence rather than get help?
Oh, yes. Yes. Oftentimes, people get help when others around them notice. There are a few people who would know. Maybe they are more enlightened in terms of what is available for mental health and mental well-being, and are willing to get help. So they would come on their own. But oftentimes people suffer in silence. So by the time they come, either harm has been done to people or to others or even to property, and that is really sad for me, because you hear stories, and then the person relapsed and we thought we could manage it, and he hurt someone and the person is injured, or he's destroyed this, because the stigma is not just with the person, the people around him or her are also stigmatized. So if your child is ill and you take him, people will see the child, everything. But then it's like, Reverend Albert's child, I'm Edwin's child, So it's not just even the patient, but those that are around also get the stigma.
Is it because we've not yet grown to the point? One of the comparisons you made was very illuminating for me. You said it's maintenance. So for you, the person taking their medication for their mental health issues is just like the person taking their medication for their diabetes
Exactly.
issues. You made it sound so simple. Is it that we haven't come to that point?
Well, I hadn't. Actually, it was my husband who, one of the times, when was it? This was about 9 years. So I think it was 2018, and I was talking, and I was like, I don't remember any patients I've seen who's been on antidepressants for 9 years or so. I was talking, and then he said, remember that with your second pregnancy, for both of them, I had what is known as pregnancy-induced hypertension. So after the first one, it went away. But with the second one, it didn't go away. I've been taking my medication. And he says, I don't even wait. So the moment I have one strip, I was like, Frank, please get me Natrizam. I just have one. He said, I have never once complained that this thing was PIH. It should have gone away after AAE was born. It hasn't gone, and I'm still taking antihypertensives. So why am I, with all my knowledge and everything, why can't I see that the antidepressant is doing the same thing, so I have to do that?
For me, one of the turning points, and I say this with all humility. When my mother got dementia, I looked at her, loving her for who she was, all she meant to me, and watching her switch between the days when she can talk, remember everything, and then the next day is the day she's off. And she looks at me and says, who are you? And she says, Albert. And I'm like, are you serious? Initially it was, but with time, I found out I could relate to that very well, and on the day she doesn't feel like it, just be there for her and with her. Then it struck me, Doc, that many of the people who were called witches years ago were either struggling from dementia, Alzheimer's, or some condition that people could not relate to. Would that be
that is a very strong possibility. They are forgetful. They walk away from their home. Sometimes they don't even check what they are wearing, and they are there. Someone catches them all and then says that they are witch. They've done this.
And she will tell you she hasn't eaten. She just finished having.
Oh yes.
She says she hasn't eaten. And you're like,
It used to happen to my grandmother too, and until one day when my dad went, because he would always tell my father that my aunt hadn't fed her, and then one day he went there, he had eaten, she had eaten, and afterwards, mommy, and then he's like, so then my dad was not sure what was going on. He have no recollection.
Doc, let me go to something you said to me during the break that made me bow down my head. That in spite of the progress we've made, people would rather still hide their pain and their suffering because institutional frameworks and so on still do not respond well enough to people who have mental health conditions. For the benefit of our listeners and viewers, tell me that story you mentioned. Of course, not without an identity. Not with an identity, but just giving an idea about
So
People are battling with.
I used to say that I'm one of the doctors who write few excuse duties, because my patients will say you are known, and the moment I take it, even without the diagnosis, but this was years ago, where I'd seen a woman who was depressed and she needed time to recover. So I gave her an excuse duty, and then I wrote the diagnosis. Now I don't do that, but then because the form had that, so I thought I had to fill it and then sign and stamp it. She came back to me 2 weeks later that when she sent it to her job, they received it, but I mean, a few days after that, they called her and said that she had been, what's the word they use? Is it retrenched or redeployed? Yes. I mean, and nothing had happened. This was someone who was doing everything. And for me, the sad thing was it was a public institution. I mean, not that it would have been right if it was private, but I mean, I thought that her rights would be more enshrined in a public. That's one thing we always say, is that, oh, at least in the public service or in the public space, the rights are respected and all of that. But no. And that's why people would not want to see the doctor, or even if they go and see the doctor and it's excuse duty, some of them who have leave time will tell you that they would rather take their leave, which is not right. You take your leave so to rest and recover, but not when you are recovering. If you had cancer, if you had malaria, if you had surgery, that wouldn't be a problem. But I must say that there are a few institutions who are also taking this up and are interested in the well-being of their members. So for those institutions, they are doing a great job. I hope that everybody can do that, because it can happen to anybody. It's no respecter of persons. I mean, for me, it hit me from nowhere. It was like you were driving and then out of nowhere, a big truck comes. I mean, that's just how I felt. You didn't
Would you
see
say
it
that
coming.
your own experience has increased your empathy for your patients?
Oh, yes. I think it's one of the things that Dr. Sifadide made me see when one time when I was talking about getting off this oppression, you know, and not letting it bother me. And she said, you've become a better therapist. You become more empathetic. Because there were times I know I had to go and see her, but I wouldn't show up. I don't want to go. You see, therapy is not easy. I tell people who I know who wants me to see them that, look, in therapy, the space is created before you know, you are talking about things you hadn't meant to say. I'm your friend. I don't want you to feel that the things you've told me, one, confidentiality is assured within the limits. Of course, if you say you are going to kill someone, I have to report that. But barring the limitations of the law, it's assured. But it's like burying yourself. It's like undressing, literally, before, not literally, figuratively.
But you undress for a surgeon.
Yes, yes, but in therapy, just before someone says that, hey, you go to therapy, because I said literally, so it's figuratively. It's undressing. That you are bare, you know, so things come up and it can be challenging, and sometimes you just go and you have to do the work. So it's like, So now when my clients don't show up, I understand. I know that's one of those days. I'll wait for a few days. If I don't hear from them, send a message and just check in on you. Is everything okay? Yes, okay. Know that whenever you want to come, just let me know and I'll give you another appointment. You leave the door open, because it's not easy.
Let me ask you, I love what we do when we talk about mental health, because we provide an avenue for people to learn about something that is so precious and yet sometimes so difficult to even talk about, because even the way we talk about it shows the level of our ignorance about it. But you've made it very easy for us to have this conversation. And I hate to end it because it's always so beautiful at this point, but promise you'll come back again.
Okay.
Let's do this again. Okay. We've come a long way. We have come a long way from 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Oh, definitely.
And most of our conversations have confirmed that. But just to sign off, Doc, the whole of Ghana is listening to you. In your opinion, what should we do differently?
When we see people struggling, we should offer help. I mean, you know the person. Maybe you have a friend who is usually gregarious, talking, and you notice over the past few days has become withdrawn or irritable or weepy. Find out what's going on. What can I do to help? If you know that the person has a history of mental illness in particular, and you think they are struggling, find out what can I do to help them. Normalize it. It's an illness like any other. You won't hide it. If you had a cat and it has been bandaged and you've been given time off, you'll be happy that you are being able to get the help you needed. It's because you went to hospital. But sometimes, even with cats, there are some people we have to take to hospital. So in the same thing, this stigma, being diagnosed with a mental illness, is not the end of the story. In fact, it was my friend Angela Jamna Boache who made me see this. One time we were talking and I was like, Auntie, this thing has really taken a toll. I mean, look at all the years I've been taking medication in, and her usual ways, he said, Amma, do you realize that even during this time, from the time you were diagnosed, you were able to do your Doctor of Bioethics, you didn't take time off work, you were working and you were studying, you were being a mother at that time, part of it, your husband, I mean, you were able to do all of this with support. So what are you talking about?
Did you say it in English or Tree?
Oh, can she? So there is,
So let me wrap up with what I will call the book titled The Unseen Side of the Engine Room by Dr. Amma Kyerewaa Edwin. 15 chapters, and this book will by all means be published one day.
Amen.
Amen to that. And she talks about, firstly, her intro to mental health, that in sixth form she had issues and somebody recommended that she meets the late Dr. Arabasifa Dede, and after sitting with her for an hour, she said, wow, this is what I would like to do. And so after becoming a doctor, she went on to become a clinical psychologist. Lesson number 2 is about personal experience. You say in May 2009, you started feeling the symptoms of depression and went to see a colleague, and because you knew the mechanism that was being used, you filtered the responses somehow, but the scores still revealed that you had depression. The third one was about stigma. You say you've always known that stigma is real, but the point that hit you the most was when you went to buy your own medication, free mind, and a colleague pharmacist said, publicly scolded you for getting help or getting treatment. Yeah. Another one said you can't be a Christian and get depressed, and it's either a sign of sin or that you're not believing God enough. And those are what reminded you that even professionals still exhibit the stigma that we talk about. The fourth is eventually tracing it to childhood events that shook you, and also the fact that you struggled to accept that you blamed it on Frank traveling and you being without him for 2 years, and all those battles in your mind had a relationship with it. The fifth was the rat race. You said many of us in our quest to succeed put pressure on ourselves and sacrifice our family time and our well-being. And you talk about your son telling you, leave your work, finish your work, I'll work before you come home so I can relate to you. And you say, as a result, you put barriers in place like not putting on your laptop when you get home. The sixth point is about rest. You say we are human beings, not human doings. So let's not fill our whole waking lives with activity. Let's make time to rest. The seventh is about sources of stress. And you see these are the things that can wear you out physically, mentally, and emotionally. And apart from lack of rest, sometimes financial and relational issues in particular can have a toll on you, and that these are events in our lives, but we can control the outcomes if we respond differently. The eighth is about self-stigma. You see, apart from the external pressures, many people struggle to accept their own situation. And you talk about a story that shook me when we were ending the first part, about your own students affirming their confidence in your competence, but beginning to have cold feet when they found out that you yourself had been on medication for a year. Or you mentioned a seemingly hypothetical but real situation. The ninth is about concealment. And we talk about the extent to which people go to conceal the fact that they are getting help so no one gets to know about it. The 10th is about antecedents. As a society, the fact that we've treated people with mental health as witches, chained them, made them feel unwanted, taking them to prayer camps and fetish shrines instead of getting professional help for them. The 11th was suffering in silence, and you're seeing that people rather suffer in silence than get help because sometimes it's not just the patient but their families also get stigmatized, and that was very revealing. The 12th is about ignorance. When I asked you about my mom, and you accepted that the fact that many people who we have in the past accused of being witches or being strange, weird, and so on are probably just suffering from a mental health condition we don't understand, and we attribute all kinds of things to them. The 12th is about institutional response. That was quite shocking. A patient that you worked with, you giving them an excuse duty for depression, and they being redeployed or retrenched or fired after 3 weeks from a public institution. That was the total abuse of their rights. The 13th or the 14th, sorry, was about empathy, and you say your personal experience with depression further enriched your practice and made you more empathetic and understanding towards your clients, and you think your practice has improved as a result of your own experience. That was very touching for me, the biggest point for me. The final one was going forward. You recommend that when we see people struggling, suddenly becoming a bit too quiet for your liking, or withdrawn, or weeping here and there, let's not walk away. Maybe let me add like the priest and the Levite. When they saw the man was dying, let's be like the Good Samaritan who will pause and show interest. And very often that little interest that we show could help them get help rather than walk away. Doc, I can't say thank you enough for this conversation. We've talked about having it for a while, and I'm glad you made time in your busy schedule to be with us. Let's wrap up by telling me how you feel about being able to share this experience just to bless somebody.
I think for me, there are things that God wants you to do, and you have excuses. Oh gosh, I've been through this.
Tears of gratitude or tears of joy?
Tears of gratitude. I mean, I'm just grateful that I can even talk about it, because before it was so difficult. Anytime I talked about it, then I would cry. But
I know many people who have been helped by you reaching out to them to share your own experience. It's changed the lives of so many, and I'm glad you've been able to do this on a bigger scale to be a blessing to humanity. And I can only say thank you for using your life as a gift for other people. Let's do this again.
Oh, sure.
Let's definitely do this again.
Oh, okay.
And help many more.
Sure.
So this has been a very, very special edition of Springboard, your virtual university with my big sister, Dr. Kyerewaa Edwin, opening up your life in a way I've never ever heard her do publicly before. But this has been such a blessing to so many, and I know that for sure. So on behalf of Team Springboard, led by Comfort and our partners MTN Pulse Enterprise Group, UMB Bank, and the Central University, and our media partners, the Multimedia Group and the Graphic Business, my name is Albert Okran, saying a big thank you to you, Dr. Edwin. And to you for listening and saying God bless you, and God bless you.